Turkish troops are on the border with Syria. Ankara is supporting what it calls a serious military operation against former Al-Qaeda-linked fighters. But could this be the beginning of more direct involvement in the war? And what will be the cost? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. Turkey is launching a major military campaign in Syria's northwestern province of Idlib, just across its border. It's backing the Free Syrian Army, which moved into the area on Saturday. Much of Idlib is controlled by Tahrir al-Sham, an alliance of factions spearheaded by a former Al-Qaeda affiliate. Turkey wants to ensure security in the region where some of the most violent conflicts of the Syrian civil war have taken place. During the Astana talks in May, Russia, Turkey and Iran signed a deal to establish de-escalation zones in Syria, which included Idlib. Ankara says it isn't sending its forces in just yet, but providing logistical and intelligence support. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan gave more details.
We have opened up a space in our region with Operation Euphrates Shield, and now we are making efforts to take a step forward by maintaining security in Idlib. Today there's a serious operation in Idlib, and it will continue because we have our brothers there who came to Idlib fleeing violence in Aleppo. We can't tell them whatever happens, you can either die or survive. We have to extend a hand to our brothers. Now this step has been taken and it is underway.
We'll get to our guests in a moment, but first, this report from Hashim Al-Bada from Gaziantep in Turkey, near the border with Syria.
Turkish artillery shelling Hayat Tahrir al-Sham positions inside Syria. The former Al-Qaeda affiliate group controls most of Idlib province, and this border area is the focal point of what Turkish authorities refer to as a serious campaign. And the Free Syrian Army is sending reinforcements to the Rayhalli area, the starting point for the new cross-border campaign. But Tahrir al-Sham, which has thousands of fighters, is vowing to fight to the death. News of the new campaign is raising concerns for civilians in Idlib.
If the Turkish army enters backed by Russian planes that have committed a massacre a few days ago in Aramaz, that is for sure unacceptable to me and to any Muslim who rejects the presence of occupiers in our country.
The Russians are the first and last enemy of the Syrian people. They are backing Bashar al-Assad. How can they be supporting the Syrian people?
The new push by Turkey comes after an agreement with Russia and Iran last month to set up a de-escalation zone in Idlib. The Turkish army will be operating in the city while the Russians will be deployed outside the province. Idlib is one of 4 de-escalation zones. The others are the outskirts of the capital Damascus, Dar'a on the border with Jordan and northern parts of Homs. The zones were established after Iran, Russia and Turkey decided to set aside their differences and find a permanent solution to the Syrian conflict. The new operation could be part of a broader deal between Russia, Turkey and Iran. But we don't know who would run Idlib once Hayat Tahrir al-Sham fighters are evicted from the province, and what will become of moderate opposition factions and the thousands of civilians living in the area. Hashim Al-Bada, Al Jazeera, Gaziantep.
Well, let's bring in our panel now. From Istanbul, Metin, Gurcan, a columnist for Al Monitor's Turkey Pulse. From Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer, a defence analyst and columnist with Novoya Gazeta, and via Skype from Arezzo in Italy, Joshua Landis, the Sandra Mackey Chair and Professor in the Department of International and Area Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Welcome to you all. Mr. Gurcan, what's at stake for Turkey here?
Okay, first let me say this, 2 facts. First one, this is not a surprising military move. meaning that we have been waiting for this for almost a month. And second one, this is not Turkey's unilateral move. This is a sort of negotiated outcome at the moment we are discussing, of Astana process. So right now, the Ankara strategic thinking is extremely important. First of all, the separation of those radical elements, I mean bad guys, from those moderates, I mean good guys. This is the first objective Ankara has been trying to achieve according with this, in accordance with this Astana talk. And also second one is, I think, extremely important. Ankara has been trying to isolate, contain PKK-affiliated YPG forces currently controlling Afrin canton in the west of Euphrates.
Mr. Landis, on what Mr. Gurcan is saying, that what Ankara is going to have to do here is separate the so-called good guys with the bad guys, the moderate elements of the opposition with those, deemed terrorists. Just how difficult is that going to be for Ankara to do, given the difficulties in doing that so far in the civil war?
In the last several months, the Al-Qaeda affiliated groups have taken over Idlib province, putting them right at the border, Bab al-Hawa and other crossings, with Turkey. This is embarrassing for Turkey. The United States, McGurk, the head of the coalition, the American head, has called this the biggest conglomeration of Al-Qaeda people since 9/11. He said something has to be done about it, and he's been pressuring Turkey to do something about it. I think in that sense, Turkey needs to step forward and perhaps try to negotiate with the rebels themselves to withdraw. And this will be modeled on the operation around Jarablos taken a year ago, in which Turkey stepped into northern Syria, north of Aleppo, and pushed out ISIS. And ISIS withdrew pretty rapidly, and FSA, Free Syrian Army groups that had been trained and helped by Turkey, moved into the area. So this may be a similar operation with negotiations by Turkey on all sides, because the Free Syrian Army is very anxious. They say, we do not want Turkey, which has helped us so much with our revolution, to end up hurting the Syrian people. He does not want them to work with Russia extensively. So this is very delicate for Turkey.
Mr. Felgenhauer, what is Russia's involvement in this going to be? Turkey and Russia have been on opposing sides of the Syrian civil war. They are coming together now to fight Tahrir al-Sham. So how is this going to work?
Well, Russia and Turkey have been kind of almost on the brink of war in the end of 15, beginning of 16. Since then, everything has changed. Now Russia and Turkey are working together through the Astana process. There has been a de facto separation of Syria into kind of zones of influence. But of course, everyone is saying this is not permanent. These are not zones of influence. But this is just provisional. But provisional things tend to last long. And so right now, Turkey is assuring itself in Idlib, which was kind of designated to Turkey to keep the peace there and keep the bad guys at least being officially prominent. Though, of course, the talk about pushing out the fighters of Tahrir al-Sham, a former al-Nusra, somewhere out of Idlib, I don't think that's practical because there's nowhere for them to go. If in the north of Syria during the Euphrates shield, they were pushed out to other parts that were controlled by ISIS. Here, right now, everyone has gathered from different parts of Syria into Idlib, and there's nowhere they can go. So the only way they can go is to go kind of underground, to pretend that they are not Tahrir al-Sham, but that they are a Free Syrian Army. That has been done during the Syrian civil war. The same fighters can have different flags and a bit different, maybe uniforms are the same, but anyway. So that's most likely what's going to be there. I don't expect any real big fighting happening. I think there'll be superficial skirmishes.
Mr. Landis,
and a lot of negotiation.
Mr. Landis, what do you make of that? What will happen to the fighters of Tahrir al-Sham, and what would losing Idlib mean for groups like them in Syria? Are they just going to be driven underground?
Well, that's a big question. So far, the Turkish operation is not to go all the way to the city of Idlib, which is the real headquarters of these al-Nusra, these Al-Qaeda groups, but to take a band of Syria that's closest to the Turkish border and get rid of the Al-Qaeda fighters from that area. They can withdraw. Already there have been reports of some Turkish tanks and trucks being escorted by Tahrir al-Sham fighters. So we don't know what negotiations have gone on between Turkey and these Tahrir al-Sham. They may fall back, allow the Turks to take this corridor in order not to provoke a full-on battle, because this would undoubtedly be a losing battle for them. It would push Turkey closer to Russia and to the Assad regime, which they don't want. But it is a very uncomfortable position for Tahrir al-Sham, because the more they pull back, the further they are, the closer they are to Assad's troops. And Russia and Assad will be coming for them eventually from the other side, from the southern side. And they are going to get sandwiched between Turkey and the Assad troops. Assad is hoping to drive all these people into Turkey itself. And that's going to be the final negotiation. Will they stand and die, as ISIS have been doing? Or will they work out some agreement with Turkey in order to flee into Turkey and get refuge there?
Mr. Gurcan, what role do you see Turkey playing in what Mr. Landis has said, also in the establishment of Idlib as a de-escalation zone?
Let me say this first. I mean, the Aleppo war, you know, Russia has, after experiencing the Aleppo war, Russian strategic decision makers, I think, come to conclude that siege warfare in Syria is not working. So right now, they have a different plan right now, and they are trusting on the Ankara's mediating power on those, you know, Sunni armed groups in and around Idlib. So I think this is the plan that they are planning to follow. First, they are coming with an sort of proposal to those armed groups right now in operating in and around Idlib. If you want to leave Idlib, then we have a proposal for you and for your families. You know, you can go to the north of Idlib to resettle there, to rehabilitate and to reintegrate, meaning that at the end of the day, if they accept this proposal and say yes, then we would expect the expansion of Eurofis Shield packet. So another option, if they prefer to stay in Idlib, meaning that they also accept this grim truth for them. They are the radical elements. So I think Russia needs Ankara's mediation not to turn Idlib case into a siege warfare. So they want to provide them a way out, those Sunni Arab armed groups in and around Idlib. So if they, I think, accept this proposal and say yes, which I think we can see a sort of a transfer of those fighters and their families. I'm talking about around 50 to 60,000 people to the north of Idlib, and we can then see the expansion of Eurofis Shield. And here is the case, here is the tricky issue. If this is the case, then I think expansion of this Eurofis Shield packet is necessary, and I'm expecting the expansion to the west. So the isolation of Afrin canton at the end of the day would work both for Ankara and Moscow. So expansion of Eurofis Shield packet to the west, isolation and containment of Afrin canton, currently under the control of YPG forces, would at the end of the day make Ankara and Moscow happy.
And if Ankara and Moscow are happy, if they can establish these de-escalation zones, Mr. Felgenhauer, how far what does that mean for the civil war? How far do these de-escalation zones go towards ending the war, do you think?
Well, the immediate success from the Russian point of view of the de-escalation zones in Idlib and central Syria and southern Syria is that all capable units can be concentrated, or most of them, in Dar al-Zor province, where right now the main action is happening, and where Russia and the supporting the pro-Assad groups hopes to take over the most important Syrian natural gas and oil assets, to give the Assad government some kind of source of a stable income, which it doesn't have right now and fully depends on handouts from Tehran and Moscow. So that's where the action is happening, and here there should be right now a ceasefire. That's very important. So right now, more or less, the Russian main opponents are not really the fighters in the Idlib province, but the Kurds, the Syrian Democratic Forces, supported by the Americans, which are moving also into Dar al-Zor and also taking over partially some of those oil and gas assets, and the main problem is there. And the Russian right now propaganda and the Russian Ministry of Defense is actually claiming that the Americans are together with ISIS and the Kurds are together with ISIS. So there you have more or less Russia and Turkey having the same enemy, and that same enemy seems to be the YPG.
And Mr. Landis, just how much of Turkey's interests in backing Moscow's vision for Syria right now, stems from the rejection of the US-backed Kurdish forces in Syria, who of course Turkey sees as an extension, of the Kurds that they're fighting in their own country?
Well, it's very important. And that's why Turkey has moved away from the United States and towards Russia, because the United States, by choosing to enter in on the side of the Kurds in Kobani 2 years ago, and then pushing with the Kurds down towards ISIS territory, has, of course, strengthened Syria's Kurds and moved them, just as American support for Iraq's Kurds did, towards independence or some broad degree of autonomy. And the Kurds of northern Syria are expecting to come out of this civil war with a broad degree of autonomy, if not independence. And that, of course, has driven Turkey into the arms of Russia and caused them to look for a way to move together in provinces like Idlib, so that they can work together with the Kurds and keep the Kurds firmly inside Syria's orbit.
And we will
see how that turns out.
Well, we've heard from Syrian Foreign Minister Walid Muallim lately saying that he can see greater autonomy for Kurds in a post-civil war Syria. Mr. Gurcan, Idlib is, of course, next to Kurdish-controlled Afrin that we've been talking about. Does Turkey also have its sights set on some kind of military move on Afrin, do you think?
At the end of the day, I think this is the Ankara's strategic objective. For me, if Ankara has been moving, its military, forces, right now we are talking about an commando battalion waiting at the borderline, and also a mechanized infantry battalion involving around 500 to 600 soldiers, and they are there to be deployed to Idlib city centers to monitor this, de-escalation zone. But at the end of the day, I think Ankara's primary target is Afrin, and according to Ankara's threat perception, Afrin comes first. So the isolation and containment of Afrin to prevent the establishment of PKK or Kurdish corridor stretching from Kandil region in northern Iraq via Sinjar region, and also from those two cantons in the east of Euphrates, Jazeera and Kobani cantons, and these Afrin cantons stretching from eastern Mediterranean. So this is a worst-case scenario for Ankara, nightmare scenario. Ankara has been thinking that it's desperately in need of preventing this to happen. So for me, Afrin canton is the primary target for Ankara.
And Mr. Felgenhauer, could Turkey, do you think, make a military move on Afrin without Russia's approval?
Most likely not, and there apparently is some kind of a tentative, at least, understanding between Moscow and Ankara that Afrin right now is going to be a separate case. Right now, Russia has established a small military mission in Afrin. It's also important for Russia to see that the Afrin enclave, controlled by Kurds, does not become a kind of American. The Americans don't appear there. And so Russia would kind of try to keep the Turks out of it for the time being. And I think the Ankara agreed to that. Most likely Afrin will be surrounded to some extent. But going in right now is not an option. That's I don't believe in that. There's an agreement not to do it.
Mr. Landis, how do you think the US is looking on at this cooperation between Russia, Iran and Turkey? First of all, in setting up de-escalation zones in Syria, you know, attempting to resolve the Syrian conflict, which the US has not been able to, and also seeing moves possibly against the Kurdish forces that they support.
Well, there's two different issues here. One is Al-Qaeda in Idlib. And there, I think that the United States is very pleased to have Turkey moving in and trying to address this issue, along with Russia. The United States does not want Al-Qaeda surviving in northern Syria. As far as the Kurds, this is a very difficult problem for the United States. I think increasingly, we will see the United States remain in northern Syria, where they've been building bases. But today, there is a big fight within the American administration about how long and how much military support to give to the Kurds, and whether that will sacrifice relations with Turkey, because the United States wants good relations with Turkey. They understand the value of Turkey. Turkey is big. It's a big economy, big military. They want it as an ally, but they can't abandon the Kurds.
Mr. Gurcan, is Turkey still interested in regime change in Syria at all, or has it given that up to fight the Kurds and to fight the jihadists on its border?
I think this narrative of regime change is over for Ankara. Right now, I mean, the decision makers in Ankara, they are thinking that, you know, Assad should stay, and the unity of Syria right now is extremely important. So, and also Ankara, as I said before, the primary enemy or primary target is those, you know, PKK-affiliated YPG forces in the north of Syria. So Ankara is in a sort of dilemma right now. Ankara has to play the enemy of my enemy is my friend strategy. So who is the enemy to play with and to fight against the other enemy? So I think at the end of the day, what we will see is a sort of initiation of negotiations between Ankara and Assad. This is inevitable. So Ankara needs Assad's support to, how can I say, to contain and this expansion and consolidation of those PKK-affiliated YPG forces in the north of Syria. So Ankara, I think, at the end of the day, we will see initiation of negotiations between Assad and Ankara. And I'm sure that this engagement is going to be very soon.
Mr. Felgenhauer, just the last question to you. What role do you see Russia playing in this engagement in shaping the future of Syria right now?
Well, the Russian strategy is clear and rather logical. So right now, the most important thing is the military operation in Dar al-Zor against the leftovers of ISIS. And the main target is not just simply to destroy ISIS, which most likely will continue as a kind of, or get some kind of guerrilla organization there in the Syrian-Iraqi border area, but to take over and control the gas and oil assets, to give Damascus give Damascus income, money, for them to begin to rebuild Syria. And then there's should be different kind of negotiations to somehow integrate parts of the Sunni opposition groups into a reformed pro-Assad or Assad government, which will more or less restore the control over Syria, maybe a bit federalized, but still more or less united Syria. And Russia would keep strong military bases, permanent bases in the coastal Tartus and in Khmeimim. That's the future that Russia sees.
Mr. Felgenhauer, thank you very much for that. Thank you to all our guests, Metin, Gurcan, Pavel Felgenhauer and Joshua Landis. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Elizabeth Puranam, and the whole team here, bye for now.